and welcome to our meeting today.
Is that right?
Let me begin with two quotations, which I think should be at the forefront of our minds as we confront the crisis that we in Britain face today. My first quotation may be well known to you. It is, of course, from Margaret Thatcher, the great lady, and is taken from the Bruges speech, on which the whole rationale of our organisation is based. In September 1989, she uttered the famous words, "We have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state, only to see them reimposed at the European level." This is the core statement which lies behind the very existence of the Bruges Group and has driven the rationale behind this country's momentous decision to leave the European Union. Unfortunately, this core belief of driving back the frontiers of the state has not, for the last 30 years, been an objective of a succession of Conservative governments. The second quotation I offer you is from Labour Prime Minister James Callaghan. He addressed his party conference in 1976 in the midst of an economic crisis. Mr. Callaghan said, "We used to think that we could spend our way out of a recession. I tell you in all candour, that option no longer exists." And it's the Callaghan quotation that may be more relevant to the difficulties that we face today. For today, the amount of money we allocate to state spending is back to the levels not set by Callaghan, but those set by Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee, when Labour pledged to build a new Jerusalem in our green and pleasant land. The big state, ladies and gentlemen, is at the heart of the problems that we face today. When Margaret Thatcher left office, public spending amounted to 23% of our national income. Now it's hit 100%, and it's inevitably rising even further. The profound difficulties that our government face today are due to this, and to my mind, when the position is so dire, reductions in the size of the state should take priority over tax cuts. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely what Margaret Thatcher did in 1982. And she laid the foundation for a consistent and prolonged period of economic growth based on sound public finances. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to pay a short tribute to Boris Johnson. Boris was and is the greatest political campaigner of our lifetime. He took a cause that all of us on this platform today, and all of you in the audience, have spent a lifetime pursuing, and he made it into a vote-winning package that gave the Conservatives their biggest majority in a generation. Well done, Boris. But in government, regrettably, he often lacked the focus necessary to get Brexit done. And in the COVID crisis, he too often allowed the bureaucrats and the so-called experts to reign supreme at the expense of hard-working individuals and small businesses. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is what has left us with a spending and inflation crisis today, the likes of which you and I have never seen before. Regrettably also, Boris's enthusiasm for green energy was largely misplaced. But what I would say is that I'm delighted to see our old friend Jacob Rees-Mogg now boldly trying to exploit all of our national energy resources. Well done, Jacob. And I say to our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, our obsession with the big state must end.
Yes.
To govern is to choose, and the choices that you and your colleagues must make must boldly reduce the size of our state. The people, not the bureaucrats, know best. And do not raise the level of our national borrowing. It's already suffocating the enterprises upon which we depend. Set the people free. No one can better the energy and enterprise of the British people. Liz, set the people free. We must once again become small state conservatives. Unless we re-establish that purpose, only the wilderness beckons. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our first panellist to speak today is the Right Honourable Sir John Redwood, Member of Parliament for Wokingham. John has a unique experience of policy formulation, having headed up the number 10 policy unit for Margaret Thatcher. Just reflect on that for a moment. This man worked for and with our greatest post-time Prime Minister. Once an MP in 1988, he challenged Margaret Thatcher from the backbenches to take action to protect the interests of our fishermen. John voted against joining the European Union in 1975. He was one of two Conservative members of Parliament who voted against Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement in 2019, considering that our fishermen were being shortchanged and that the Northern Ireland Protocol undermined the integrity of the United Kingdom. The Bruges Group also did not endorse the withdrawal agreement for very similar reasons. John has also worked in the City of London for many years and put his financial expertise to good use, including a monthly column in the Financial Times. When I was a Member of Parliament, I worked closely with John, and quite frankly, I'm amazed that no Conservative Prime Minister since 2010 has used John's expertise and experience at Cabinet level. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome John Redwood.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm strongly in favour of us having a growth strategy, and my advice to the current government is that it has to have three central pillars. Yes, lower tax rates can be part of it. I particularly like it when you can lower the tax rate and collect more revenue, which in some cases you can do. But as Barry has rightly said, controlling public spending and limiting the extent of the role of the state is also fundamental to a growth strategy, so that we have a state that serves us well and provides high quality services in those areas where they are strongly wanted, but does not stretch its tentacles too far and wide, does not waste money, does not spend money making life worse. And yes, we need a series of changes to the laws and regulations that we've inherited in superabundance from our membership of the European Union, so that we can free the potential, recapture the lost markets, rebuild the damaged capacity to make more for ourselves, to grow more for ourselves, to produce more of our own energy, all things that were shrunk by a combination of regulation, taxation, and clever manoeuvring by our partners and friends on the continent. So let us begin with the issue of how we might find some easy ways of saving money. Because I've got good news for the government. Not all public expenditure cuts are bad news. You don't have to go out there and damage the health service by having fewer doctors and nurses. We need more doctors and nurses, and they should be attainable given the extent by which the budget has been increased. But let's start with one that might not be too contentious in this audience, but is clearly contentious with the British establishment. And that is, why don't we actually stop all the illegal migrants coming in their tens of thousands? The people traffickers put their lives at risk and profit from it. So will our law and order forces in government make sure that we can catch them, stop them, take the appropriate action? And it looks as if we now have a Home Secretary with great legal skills. She's going to need them, because the last Home Secretary wanted to do this, and she was thwarted by legal processes time after time. So Suella, I'm backing you. I believe you want to do it. Let's do it, because those tens of thousands of people that come in occupy hotels at our expense. They're understandably not allowed to work, and then to move them out to the hotels we have to build more social housing and make expensive provision available. So that would be a really good saving, and it would be good for the people themselves who would no longer be put at risk. And our migration should be under proper control, where we invite in a reasonable number of people with the skills and with the investments that they can bring to our country in the way that would serve us as well as them, and we would save a lot of money. So why is the government still offering lots of grants to the highways authorities and councils of our country to impede all those who want to go to work in a car, maybe because they're going at antisocial hours? Why do they want to impede white van, man and woman? Because it means they can do fewer jobs in the day from their van. Why do they want to stop people delivering the goods by van to our homes through the online revolution? And why do they want to make it very difficult for the trucks to replenish the supermarket shelves? Why indeed do they want to impede the emergency vehicles and those who are sending the bandages and drugs to our hospitals? But there are just too many expensive schemes all around the country, deliberately wrecking the lives of those who wish to work hard and need a vehicle to do so. And there is then the imperative of growing more of our own food. So why not, government, save all that money you're currently spending on new wilding grants, where you literally pay farmers money to stop growing food and to let the fields just do what Now, I love our green and pleasant land, and I love nature, and I'm all for some wilderness, and I've got news for the government. There's plenty of wilderness which you cannot farm. So don't turn the place you can farm into a wilderness at my expense as a taxpayer. Let's instead get behind you. So, there are many more ideas, but it's a short speech, you'll be pleased to know. You have to read the blog if you want to know all the other ones. But then we need to take control of our energy. And our energy policy, under the common energy policy of the European Union, has been very disadvantageous for our country. By 2019, they had full control, a regulation and 4 directives, a system of controlling our electricity and our gas and our fossil fuels in a way which meant we had to import more and produce less, the very opposite of what we ought to be trying to do when we have a very big balance of payments deficit. And the longer you have a balance of payments deficit, the more your currency is at risk, and the more you have to sell your assets off to foreigners in order to pay the bills, when we should be allowing the market to operate, getting rid of the regulations that stand in the way of us exploiting our own oil and gas and producing our own electricity closer to home. It's quite possible to do so. We are a well-endowed country with all that, and literally our policy, the EU policy, was preventing us taking out more of our own gas and making us import dependent. and encouraging us to rely much more on intermittent wind power, so that you then needed to import electricity from nuclear France or wherever on the days that the wind did not blow. This was not a good set of policies. I'm delighted that I and others have persuaded the government to change their policies, because it would be nice to keep the lights on, and it would be nice to have a bit more generating capacity and a bit more domestic gas, which at the margins would help with the price. But above all, it would help with the availability, because if you make yourself completely dependent on imports in too many ways, you can then end up with a nightmare, as we saw for Germany, very cruelly dependent on Putin's gas, and then at a loss to know what to do when Putin's gas was no longer available. So we need an energy policy that certainly deals with availability, and in due course starts to make some progress with dealing with the very high prices. The scarcity obviously fuels the imports and fuels the higher prices, because you're buying at the margin in very volatile markets, and having to pay too much. If you had more of your own contract supply, it would be better all round. You also need honest money to have a secure basis on which the private sector can invest. And I'm sure we'll hear from Tim, who's been very prescient and expert on all these things. But we had a Bank of England which inflated too much by printing far too much money, keeping interest rates too low for too long, and disagreeing with people like Tim, who rightly said, you will get an inflation if you carry on like this throughout 2021 in the way that they did. But what we also need is a Bank of England which doesn't then lurch too far the other way. Yes, they had to control the money supply. Yes, they had to put interest rates up. But if they lurch too far, we will then have a needlessly long and heavy recession, when they have done quite a lot already to bring the prices back down, as they are now forecasting. So you need a bank that makes these judgments correctly. And when we saw the convulsions in the bond market last week, the commentary was all about the judgments of Kwasi Kwarteng on the Friday. But what about some analysis of the judgments of the Bank of England on the Thursday? Because everybody in the debate agrees that the Bank of England is the sole setter of interest rates. I won't go into whether that's completely true, but let's assume they're all right, and they are the sole setter of interest rates. We had an interest rate crisis last week, so that surely was the responsibility of the bank. And the bank perfectly reasonably put up short rates on the Thursday, but it let the market know that it wanted long rates up as well, and it let the market know that it was going to be selling a whole load of the bonds it had bought up at much dearer prices, incidentally, because it wanted to drive the bond prices down, which is the way you get the mortgage and longer rates up. And then it got overdone, and so the bank did this extraordinary U-turn, and we're told we're going to have 2 weeks of quantitative easing, and then we go back to quantitative tightening. So we sell bonds, we buy bonds, we sell bonds. Most bizarre policy. We want a straightforward, decent policy which delivers sustainably low inflation, that doesn't throttle the economy and doesn't prevent young people from being able to buy a home of their own. So, ladies and gentlemen, a growth strategy needs that third element I was talking about, which is those changes to laws and opportunities which could get our sectors growing again. A lot of our basic industry, which needs a lot of energy, clearly needs an energy policy for the medium term which can deliver available, plentiful and sensibly priced energy. And we're some way away from that at the moment. You don't have a decent industrial chance in this world unless you have good available energy to transform materials and make things. How can you have a steel industry, an aluminium industry, a glass industry, a cement industry, unless you've sorted out the energy situation? So please, Jacob, let's get on with the energy fix, because that is essential to heavy industry. If you want to grow more of your own food, you then obviously need a policy, the opposite to the Wilding policy, one which is supportive. It's a very managed or mismanaged market in every country, where there's all sorts of subsidy interventions everywhere, so we need to make an intelligent use of our agricultural support, so that we back investment and then competitive answers to the provision of food. rather than using subsidy against ourselves and against food production. And we obviously need to review the whole weight and volume of regulation. I'm pleased the government has announced that a small company now can have 500 people and not just 250 people. They now need to spell out to those companies that come within that net what extra freedom they're going to have, because having a great base of smaller entrepreneurial companies is fundamental. I am very pleased that one of my campaigns to sort out IR35 has been recognised by the government, and I think that is probably the single most important thing on the supply side measures they've announced so far. We were driving people out of self-employment, preventing them being self-employed, or driving the successful ones abroad. Somebody who wants to set up in business for themselves for the first time needs a little bit of slack inland revenue. They may, for their first year, only work for one firm because that's the only contract they can win. But if they're not an employee getting employee benefits, let them be self-employed. The proof must be they've got a website, they're trying to get other contracts in, because then they can grow and they can become a more successful self-employed business, and they may go on to be a small business employing people. So give them a bit of slack, because they are the future. They are the businesses that could emerge, could grow, could make the big changes. And if they're not that kind of future, they're still crucial to local communities, because they are the people who will come out at odd hours and sort out the problems you've got in your home, or supply the things that the large companies are not able to produce. So ladies and gentlemen, yes, we need a freedom revolution. Yes, we need an enterprise revolution. And government, by all means, cut the taxes, but make sure you can afford what public service you're buying, provide some really great public service in the areas that really matter, and get out of the rest, and let us get on and do the job.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome one of our finest Brexiteer MPs in the House of Commons, and a very effective and diligent Minister of the Crown. Andrea Jenkyns.
Thank you. I mean, what a welcome, and how great to be on a panel with John and Bill, colleagues in the House, who's been fighting for, and also yourself, of course, Barry, who's been fighting for decades for Brexit, and I think we're in sound company in this room with their views, and I was nodding away to everything you said, John. Now, ladies and gentlemen and friends, last time I spoke at the Bruges Group at conference was actually in here, this very room, and it was during the time we was already having to fight for Brexit. Theresa May was Prime Minister, and hasn't a lot changed in the interim. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you agree, but I feel that we've got a fight on our hands yet again, but this time for freedom of speech. Now, did any of us in this room ever imagine that one day we'd be lambasted for saying what a woman is? Or that we think men shouldn't be competing against women in sports? We were told that social media platforms would encourage discourse, yet too often they're used to silence one side of the conversation, which I've certainly found lots of times. I'm sure John, Bill and everybody in this room would have found that. Now we've got corporations deciding, in a political motivated fashion, what are acceptable opinions and what are not. Now, did you see that only last month PayPal shut down the account of journalist Toby Young? It's crazy. He's the founder of the Free Speech Union. I just think the world has gone bonkers. Now, I'm proud to be here again, but let us not forget, for over 30 years the Bruges Group has been at the forefront of the fight for freedom. In an age where liberty is under challenge around the world, it remains important that we understand what our values are, why we hold them, and what it will mean for the next generation. Now, earlier this year I was honoured to be appointed as Minister for Skills, Higher Education and Further Education by Boris Johnson, and then by Prime Minister Liz Truss. Now, this brief is broad, and it puts me at the coalface of some of the key challenges in this country. Now, education should and must be at the heart of our conservative agenda. in an area of public policy that has direct impact to everybody in the UK, regardless of age or upbringing. I previously worked in education and I saw firsthand the opportunities it gives people, regardless of their background, their ethnicity. And learning a new skill set helps people open doors that were previously closed to them. Now, as my dearly departed dad used to say to me, it's not where you come from that matters, it's what you do in life that matters. This is why Conservatives cannot afford to abandon education to those who may wish to silence us. I'm a firm believer of the view that free speech must be a formative part of education, that it must serve as a foundation for education. Our schools must be bastions of freedom. Teachers must be impartial and not push left-wing agendas onto students. Our colleges and universities must be a forum for debate and discourse. They must be places in which ideas are challenged and not cancelled. Now, my ethos, this ethos is my driving force, and this is why I'm a meritocrat and not a feminist. Now, I don't believe in positive discrimination, but in a society where people are judged by their character, their ability, freedom of expression is an essential part of this. Now, this is why I'm delighted that in this autumn, I'm responsible in my brief for taking the freedom of speech bill through Parliament. Now, the freedom to speak one's mind and not to worry about approaching controversial subjects is an essential part of what makes society free. This is especially true in higher education, an area where this right should be unquestioned. In recent months, we've seen the no platforming campaigns aimed at rescinding invitations to guests in universities. We've seen reports of academics being afraid to espouse what we in this room would deem regular views. Now, we've seen trigger warnings on literary classics. Many universities and colleges have signed up to manifestos of left-wing groups. And we've seen a growing consensus among students that the places where they study have become less tolerant of different views. This is unacceptable and it's an issue we must tackle. Now, the bill will help to address this issue, and rightly so. Now, the comments you made earlier about Boris, I completely agree with. I think what a wasted opportunity with that majority. Now, Boris said of this bill, freedom of speech is at the very core of our democracy. It's an absolute right that our great universities, the historic centres of free thinking and ideas, will now have their freedom protected and bolstered by legal protections. Our former Prime Minister was right. Universities should be a place where people come to have their views challenged, to be part of the forum of discussion and learn more about the different thought processes that people have. And this is not a controversial statement. Now, the bill aims to prioritise freedom of speech at our universities by strengthening the legal obligations towards this principle and helping to ensure that we can guarantee the concept of freedom of speech for students both now and in the future. Whilst the politically motivated campaigners within the higher education sector may oppose this bill, I take it as a sign that we're doing something right. Because how can anyone rational be against free speech? The government and I are determined to see this bill become law as soon as possible. But education is not the sole preserve of universities, and this is what we've lost sight of in recent years. A skilled modern economy competing on the global stage requires technical skills just as much as it needs graduates. Yet the current system would rather our young people get a degree in Harry Potter studies than the apprenticeship in construction. Now, it doesn't take magic powers to work out that this is wrong, which is why the government is committed to putting the broomstick to good use and carrying out a spring clean of low-quality courses. If a course isn't providing someone with a positive outcome, be a well-paid job, then it makes no sense why the government should be funding it, especially its taxpayers' money. Now, we're injecting more flexibility in the funding system, and we are changing the landscape of how qualifications are funded and making it easier to access education, whatever stage in your life. Now, skills are a major part of my brief, and I'm determined to make sure that the skills we give our young people are fit for the future. In some cases, they're simply outgetting us at universities. They're being fed a diet of critical race theory, anti-British history, and sociological Marxism, which is why this government is determined to provide an alternative. Now, the introduction of T-levels will give students hands-on experience with industry leaders. Degree apprenticeships mean that people get stuck into real-life jobs while simultaneously studying. And we are launching the lifelong learning entitlement in 2025. And this is a definition of conservatism. It gives people the tools they need to plough ahead and make the most of their talents and drive the economy forward. After all, this is a country, let us not forget, that gave us the internet, the telephone, the television and the railways. And I'm very proud to be British. Now, we didn't do it all by having our brightest and best students sat in dusty seminars and discussing decolonisation, pronouns or patriarchy. Now, we did it through unleashing innovation, entrepreneurial spirit and through technical know-how. And this is the kind of system I want us to get back to. We're all excited about using our Brexit freedoms, I'm sure everybody in this room is, to deregulate modern industries and trade with emerging markets. But we need to make sure we have the skills to capitalise on these opportunities. You don't have to be in a lecture hall to learn something. And we have fantastic skills boot camps, which are 16-week courses that allow students to build up valuable sector-specific skills. Now, I recently visited one in Castleford for HGVs. And I witnessed the remarkable work that is training our next generation of logistic workers. I got to drive the truck as well. My dad was a trucker, and I drove it pretty much okay. And I told everybody afterwards how I only wrote my car off 3 weeks before. Now, it's at a police training centre I visited. I saw the hard work and the skill which is required to train thousands of our police officers that we're putting on the street. And at an animal welfare college, I was shown the academic opportunities available to those who do not want to go to university. It was like something out of a science fiction movie where they're training their veterinary nurses with virtual reality headsets. It was amazing. And I had to go as well and walked into a wall. Has anyone else tried it, by the way? Now, the point is that universities don't have a monopoly on providing good quality education. Conservatism recognises this, and my priority will be to ensure that everyone who is able to access the training and skills which suits their particular talent. Now, as a government, we should be immensely proud of our accomplishments in education today, from setting up academies, and I'm very pleased that our Prime Minister Liz Truss is, wanting to push grammar schools again, which I think that's a great move forward. We've introduced the T-levels, and we're promoting and expanding apprenticeships. We've fundamentally changed the nature of education since 2010, and we should feel proud as Conservatives. Now, I've outlined throughout this the problems that we continue to face that didn't exist a decade ago, like the challenging of freedom of speech. But we will not, we shall not, and we cannot take our foot off this accelerator. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tim Congdon.
Hello everyone. It's a great honour and privilege to be here speaking at the Bruges Group Fringe Group meeting again. And Barry, thank you very much for asking me to be among this very distinguished panel. I'm going to talk about the current crisis, and I should say I am currently a member of the Conservative Party. Some of you in the room may know that I have been a member of UKIP in the past, indeed was UKIP economics spokesman from 2010 to 2014. Anyway, I am now currently a Conservative. I suspect some things I say won't be comfortable for you. I'm sorry about that. I'm not afraid to criticise, and I will be doing so in my remarks today. John, I really enjoyed your speech. I agree with every word, and Andrea, I appreciated your speech too. So thank you very much for setting the scene, and I'll refer to both of you when I say. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two kinds of public spending. There's spending on interest on the debt, and there's all the other kinds of spending that government does. Now, John, I'm going to shock you, but we can call the other kinds of spending worthwhile. I'm sure not all of them are, but most of it is. All right? The spending on health, education, and, okay, justice. And then there's another kind of spending. Interest on the public debt. And I put it to you, this is utterly futile. This is just simply the government taxing Peter to pay Peter. What's the point? And so one of the first objectives of government policy should be to keep the burden of debt interest down. That then implies that you want to control the public debt. That then implies certain things about the budget deficit. Let's think about this. I hope, I'm told by Robert Dawes this is going to work. Does it work? That's the intro. So this shows you the ratio of interest on the debt to total public spending since 1972. The ratio's gone down, and you might say, what's the problem? There's a problem, I'm afraid, because this stopped in 2020, and what's happening at the moment really isn't very good news. Another way of looking at this is to bring out how small that debt interest is relative to spending until a couple of years ago. This is an achievement. This was in fact the result of good public policy towards the debt and debt interest in the previous 20, 30 years, and John and I and other people were involved in advocating some of these policies back in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, let's just think about this in a very simple way. A government is running a budget deficit at the moment, all right? It cuts taxes in 2022. That means that the deficit in future years is higher. Yeah? That means the growth of debt in future years is higher. Yeah? That means the growth of debt interest in future years is higher if the rate of interest is unchanged. If the rate of interest is unchanged. Now, you might say that there's an easy way to deal with this problem. If I may say so, we've heard some of these whispers, well, they've been articulated fairly clearly in the last couple of years by one or two people. There's an easy way out of all this: you inflate. All right? Because if you inflate, you reduce the value of the debt, all right? The typical interest rate on the debt at the moment is around about 3%. The inflation rate at the moment is like about 10%, yeah? So when we have more inflation, by the way, the public debt is about, I'm excluding the indexed part, it's about getting up to £2,000 billion. We have inflation of 10%. The inflation tax, ladies and gentlemen, is, you can work out yourself, £200 billion. All right? That's how much you're made worse off by having money in the bank, earning no interest. All right. Now, so, we tell the world we're going to try and deal with this problem by inflation, but you can't get away with that because possibly the bondholders will retaliate by requiring a higher rate of interest. And what does that do to future debt interest? It puts the burden of debt interest up. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a chart of, I wish I wasn't showing this under Conservative government. I really do wish I wasn't showing to under Conservative government. There you can see what the interest rate was on 10-year government debt back a bit more than a year ago, 1st of September 2020. I'm afraid the people holding debt were fools, and I told them that at the time because there was going to be a lot of inflation. John mentioned that. They were fools. They shouldn't be holding debt, paying 0.25%, given that very high inflation was coming up. And look what's happened. The interest rate now, it isn't high enough still, but it's 4%, better than 4%. And you can see that surge at the end. When did that start? I'm afraid it started only a few months ago. Why? Why? It started, I'm afraid, because we had more than rumours of tax cuts that were going to occur when the government was already running a large budget deficit, and the bondholders knew that this wasn't a very good idea. They knew there was inflation as well, and they wanted a higher return on their bonds, which pushes up the future debt interest bill. Now, you will guess what I'm saying, that I'm not a supporter of Mr. Quanting's mini-budget well, a week or two back. No, not at all. Look, this government, I hope it gets re-elected. I hope it does get re-elected. I'm afraid I do fear it'll be a Labour government to sort out the mess created by it. But now I'm going to lapse a bit into autobiography. We have been here before, and let me just assure you that Britain will eventually sort out this problem. I don't know if it'll happen with Mr. Quating as Chancellor. I'm afraid on the running so far, not very likely, but we have sorted it out before. This shows you the ratio of debt interest to GDP going back to the Second World War. So it's very high after the Second World War, not very surprising, because of course debts and so on to deal with it. And then it's again much lower at the moment, although it's about to shoot up. Can I just, how am I going for time, Barry? All right.
Okay. No, 5 minutes.
If you excuse me, I'm going to read from, this is a statement in the with the spring budget. We don't have the documents for the mini budget because they're back. We don't have them. And that's part of the problem with what Quating was doing. But still, this is a document that came out with the 2022 budget in March or April, I forget when exactly. Debt interest spending is forecast to reach £83 billion next year, that's 22-23. The highest nominal spending of this type ever, and the highest relative to GDP in over 2 decades. This is nearly 4 times the amount spent on debt interest last year, that was 2.6 billion in 2020-21, and now listen to this, ladies and gentlemen, and exceeds the budgets for day-to-day department spending on schools, the Home Office, and the Ministry of Justice combined. That was actually before Mr. Quating's mini-budget, which pushed those numbers up to, well, we had another Department of State, it's all wrong. We have been here before. And can I just, it's very, very sad. I mean, we had that, you see, back in the 1945, 5% of GDP came down. I'm afraid it came down largely because of inflation in the 50s, 60s, 60s. Then, in the late 70s and early 80s, it was rising. I used to go along as a journalist to the Expenditure Committee of the House of Commons when the Treasury civil servants kept on, sometimes ministers, being asked, why are your calculations for debt interest always too low? The interest rate on the debt then sometimes exceeded 16%, not 4%. That's the way they'll punish irresponsible governments, including British governments. Then, happily, we had the Thatcher government. The Thatcher government was committed to sound public finances. Look, I'm a conservative, I believe in a small state and low taxes, and that's exactly why I'm opposed to tax cuts that are not, that don't arise from previous reductions in public spending and that actually infringe basic principles for sound public finance. All right? So, we had the Thatcher government. I'm sure John was there at the time. We had the medium-term financial strategy. I had this very young man. We must reduce the rate of growth of quantity of money to get inflation down. We must have moved towards budget surplus to get the debt and debt interest down. It happened. And so we had all these years when the ratio of debt interest to GDP came down. I'm very sorry. Under Conservative government is going the wrong way. I'm sorry what's happening at the moment is wrong. Well, Barry, thank you for allowing me some free speech, if I can put it that way. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
I welcome to our meeting not just a Member of Parliament now, but an institution. Sir William Cash. Now, Bill and I go back a very long way. We both voted against the Maastricht Treaty. We were a small group of only 24 MPs out of a total of 340 Conservative MPs. I personally could not countenance the abolition of the pound. And that's where Maastricht led. The abolition of the pound and locking us in to the European Union. The Deputy Chief Whip, I think Bill will probably remember him, the Deputy Chief Whip, Tristan Gall-Jones, dubbed us quite mad. That was the official view. Now I ask you today, were we mad? Or were the supporters of Maastricht mad? Now, Bill and I were different from most Conservative members of Parliament. Bill had been a very successful lawyer before entering Parliament, and I had been an executive director of a FTSE 100 company and a qualified tax expert. Frankly, we had earned our living by backing our own judgments. The herd, that's the term in chic term, the herd, not Douglas, but maybe there's not much difference. The herd actually in the Conservative Party was sold on Maastricht. Now, I also very much remember my first conversation with Bill Cash. I'd been a member of Parliament for about 3 months, and Bill had just spoken for, I think it was about 2 hours. Yeah. It was a 2-hour speech in the Chamber House of Commons. Now, I've got a pretty sharp political antennae, and maybe it was the shouts of "shut up" and "sit down" that alerted to me to the fact that his peroration did not seem to be going too well. When I finished, I gently inquired, "Why did you go on for so long, Bill?" And he replied robustly, I wanted them to know that I meant business." And now, after 30 years, I think they've probably got the message that Bill meant business. And Bill has, of course, meant business all the way through his parliamentary career, and the result of him meaning business is that Britain is free again, free to govern itself. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir William Cash, Member of Parliament.
Well, yes, I did mean business, and I still do. And I want to make just a few comments about my colleagues here, because we've all fought the battles together over many years. In the case of John, I first met him in the mid-1980s when he was at number 10, and he did an amazing job, which we actually could not do without. It's one of the most remarkable, I think it's important, very important to stress the point that he ought, in my opinion, to be in the cabinet. And I think he should have been on other occasions as well. And Barry is completely right, and Andrea, thank you very much for your comments, and Tim too, with your critical judgment of these matters. A bit above my pay grade, I'm afraid. I don't really understand all the economics, but I do understand about freedom and democracy, and that's what I want to talk about, because it's very, very simple. What we have experienced, certainly since Maastricht, is two things running parallel together. One of which is that, as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, we have had a revolution. It's not a policy. I wrote to Liz Truss quite recently, with what I described as some thoughts from Sir Bill Cash. And I made the point that you can't separate the European policy making from European law making. The two things run together. In a government, in the constitution, you are governed by laws that are made by qualified majority voting in other countries, and they together do it behind closed doors, and they do it without even a transcript, so that nobody can actually even identify how those laws were made and why. Can you imagine all the people in this room not having access to Hansard if they needed to be able to see what had been decided? That is how the European Union functions. So it's not the slightest bit surprising to me that now give Italy a boost for the moment too, because they have just begun on a new journey themselves. And Mrs. Maloney is now in a position, although the British media don't seem to want to refer to this, where she has an overall majority, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, and the people that she's got in her coalition have only got about 8 or 9% themselves. She is in an extraordinarily strong position, and she is talking a great deal of sense about the future of Europe. You have the same, actually, although Macron is paralysed, because he has Mélenchon on the one side and he has Le Pen on the other, and he's caught in the middle and is effectively paralysed. He can't achieve the sovereignty of Europe that he was campaigning for during the election. And at the same time, you've got Hungary, you've got Poland, you've got the Baltic states, absolutely terrified of, and quite rightly so, and of course Ukraine, of Vladimir Putin. The great advantage that I'm putting forward is simply this, that not only have we exported goods over these years, we have exported Euroscepticism and self-government and democracy, which is one of the great things that we've managed to achieve over the last 40 to 50 years. It is an extraordinary revolution, and we have helped Europe to begin to rediscover its own freedom and democracy as well. We have work to do, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the things that is unfinished business from the Brexit revolution is Northern Ireland. There is no basis whatever why Northern Ireland should be anything other than regarded as an absolutely fundamental, integral part of the United Kingdom. It is unthinkable that the European Union should dictate to us whether or not we, in this country, of the United Kingdom, can be in any way governed by the European Union. And I've been very much involved in this Northern Ireland Protocol debate for that reason. And I had a meeting with Boris when we actually drafted the bill, and then the question was it ever going to see the House of Commons? Because the real question was, although the bill contained many of the right ingredients, was it actually going to be published and voted on? And there was a problem. And some of the people who've just sprung up in the last couple of days or so, making huge criticisms of what's going on, are the same people who actually were responsible for restraining Boris from going ahead with that bill. So I had a meeting with him, and I was invited to number 10, and I sat in the cabinet room, and he was in front of me, and we had what I would describe as a discussion. I did give him a letter as I came in the room, explaining what I intended to say, just in case there should be any misunderstanding afterwards. There was no misunderstanding, and it was a very constructive meeting. And I said, I hear that people are effectively saying, you can't go ahead with this bill, but you've got to, because this is the United Kingdom. We want self-government, we want democracy, And there is no reason on earth why the Northern Irish people should be governed by EU lawmakers. The kind of he listened, and I rang up Suella Braverman afterwards, now the Home Secretary, then the Attorney General. And I won't go into all the details, some of it's quite private, very interesting stuff. And the bottom line is that the next morning there was a discussion, and the bill suddenly was released for the purposes of legislation. Won't go into all the details, but I can tell you it was very, very interesting political engineering. And the bottom line is that that bill then got its second reading with a majority of 74, and then went through the entire process of the committee stage after that without a single amendment. It's now in the House of Lords. We'll fight that battle when we come. And I would warn the House of Lords not to try to interfere with what's been decided. This is about the United Kingdom. That's what we're fighting for, and that's what we're going to deliver. Now, so Brexit is not just a policy. It is about our democracy, and it is about freedom. It is a revolution. As John pointed out, it's also we can have our own energy policy. We must be self-sufficient. I'm a member of the thing called the Nuclear Delivery Group. We have changed the whole, no one's really heard a great deal about this group, but I'll tell you this, in the space of 1 year we've moved from 0 to a full nuclear program. We're actually achieving objectives, and by getting out of Iraq, we're actually able to do our own European, our own United Kingdom, un-European policy making, and that is a fantastic advantage and a movement towards our self-sufficiency. And then there is the question of our ability to be able to decide the kind of laws that we're governed under. And in the bill that was originated with Theresa May, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, we were effectively accepting, and still as I speak, in our legislation, is not a recognition, but an application of the principles of the supremacy of EU law. Now that doesn't mean we're governed by Europe, we make our own laws, but we have the ability to repeal them. So my European Scrutiny Committee, and I have to confess I've been on that committee since 1985, I'm told I'm the longest standing member of any select committee almost in the history of Parliament. Probably that's true too. But that report, which we made literally on the 21st of July, sets out arrangements for abolishing the supremacy of EU law altogether, and to sunset the provisions as well, so that if by the end of 2023 there are any left around lurking in odd corners, we can deal with them. This is not something which has received anything much in the way of publicity in the press or the media, because it's all a bit too tedious for them to have to go through it, isn't it? But the bottom line is that to complete Brexit, to complete that rebellion that started with Maastricht, to achieve our freedom and our democracy, we are on the brink, by the end of 2023, of getting rid of all EU law and its application through our courts as well. And I think there's much more I could say, but you'll be glad to know I'm not going to make a 2-hour speech. I just wanted to get a few simple points across. I believe in the United Kingdom. I believe in the Conservative Party. I believe in our ability to achieve full freedom, full self-government, and I'm proud to take part in this meeting today. I have had great relations with the Bruges Group. I set up the Friends of Bruges Group back at the time when the Bruges Group itself was founded, and I'm very proud to work with Barry all those years, and also with all of you, and thank you very much for listening to what I've had to say.
tremendous peroration, wasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? What a performer he is. And he did it virtually without looking at his notes at all. Great man, great man. Now it's time for questions. Now I think we may have some ladies and gentlemen of the press over there. They may have a few questions for their authoritative worksheets that they work for. Anybody over there? Media? Yes, you sir. Yes, you sir. Yeah.
Not media.
Oh, you? Okay, sorry. I didn't mean any harm. Just ask a question. I thought there were media people.
Sorry, thank you for speaking. Very much. Sorry, my question is about something that Sir John Redwood said earlier. He talked about, he mentioned illegal immigration, but what can be done to reduce mass illegal immigration has risen in the last few decades and that was unprecedented in the history of our country. Changing character cities, and we're seeing problems like something you might have seen on the news of Leicester, where massive imported volumes of retail, like ethnic retail abroad, and really don't need.
John?
Well, legal migration is entirely within the control of the United Kingdom government now that we are out of the European Union. Large numbers are still legally coming in because the government, in conjunction with business, has agreed that there are various categories of skill that are needed, which we're not supplying for ourselves in sufficient numbers, and so they are permitted. And there is a general commission based on the salary that somebody would command if they're coming here. So if the government wished to reduce the amount of legal migration, then they could identify skill areas where we now think we've got enough domestically, or they could change and lower the salary cap to raise the salary cap rather to make it more restrictive. Why aren't they doing so? Well, I think it's because there are still problems in our labour market, and I think the government did announce on Friday new measures to come forward, which I look forward to as quickly as possible, which would be mentoring, support, training, whatever it needs, so that many more of those hundreds of thousands of people who are not currently in employment and are getting benefit support could actually be better off by getting into a job, because if we could match more of those people to the jobs we're generating, we wouldn't then need to invite in so many people to do those jobs from outside.
Thank you, John. Gentleman there, yes. Your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Is this on?
Just shout it out.
I think for many, the title of this event is possibly misleading, but it's getting Brexit done. But for many, Brexit happened. So January 2020, it happened. 2.5, 3 years ago. So given that Brexit's in the past, what does the panel think have been the economic positive things that have happened since then, free from the shackles of Europe, to which we can rejoice and think that the UK economy is in for a good time? What have they witnessed thanks to Brexit over the last 2.5 years?
Thank you very much, sir. The title is completely correct. If you were listening carefully to what Sir William Cash said, he explained there's still a lot more to do. And I think all members of our panel and the government are aware of what needs to be done further to make Brexit even more successful. But who on the panel would like to address the specific point that the gentleman has raised there? Bill?
I would simply say, just to repeat what I've said already, the bill itself, getting rid of EU retained law, and the other bill to deal with Northern Ireland and its protocol, is actually happening right now. You may say, I'm not sure whether you were complaining or whether you were actually advocating the fact that Brexit was done.
I voted for Maine.
That's what I thought. That's exactly what I'm driving at.
Well, the economic benefits.
Yes,
Very good, sir.
That's
Let's give the panel a chance.
That is why I phrased the reply the way I did, because I suspected that was the case. actually, I did refer to what's going on in Italy and what's going on in France and so on and so forth as examples, and in Poland and in other countries. The EU itself is imploding politically. However, I do think that in terms of the United Kingdom, we've passed the necessary legislation, and there is a provision which I was responsible for promoting and which was accepted by the government at the time in 2020, which is called Section 38, which enables us to not only to reassert our sovereignty, but to apply it. That is self-government. That enables the people of this country at general elections, as in 2019, to introduce legislation without any interference from the European Union to fulfil the Brexit policies as advocated in the referendum by those people. There are massive advantages to us in terms of getting rid of excessive regulation and restrictions which were previously imposed upon us by the method of legislation that was made in the EU. So there is nothing negative whatsoever. And those people who are still stuck in the mud, the remainers of this world, I'm afraid to say, are completely and totally out of kilter, not only with the British people, but with what's going on in Europe as well.
Yes. Could you just address this point?
Well, I would say that there are many Brexit benefits to come, and that the government, partly because of COVID, has been very slow in actually delivering those obvious benefits. I mean, I want to see VAT off more things. It's a great pity we want to take off energy.
Because I believe in quantitative money and monetarism, you know? Spring of 2020, I told him there's going to be a lot of inflation. They ignored me.
Gentleman there, could you just stand up and put your question? We'll leave the microphone for a moment.
Hello panel, thank you for letting me ask a question. My name is Bill Dixon. I'm from a small town on the west coast of Cumbria called Whitehaven. Now, underneath Whitehaven is a black material, which you'll be familiar with, called coking coal. Now, we import coking coal, we used to import it from Russia, and we import it from the United States, Canada, and Australia. And I just wondered if the panel would agree with me that if the planning system won't approve the Whitehaven coking coal mine, perhaps the law could be changed and we could have an act of parliament to make it legal.
We can ask you to look at schools as well. I've been made aware of one particular guide which was produced by UCL. It's also published by UNESCO, which recommends no platforming people, especially gender critical feminists. And it's being promoted by your department and also by the Home Office. So could you look at that matter?
Thank you. Certainly would. We're on the same page with any of this. As I said in my speech, freedom of speech starts at such a young infant age. I've got a 5-year-old, and I think it's important, that his generation shouldn't be afraid to, speak up for what he believes in. And I also think that, I've got a girl who works for me. I've got all the guys in the office here who works for me. So. And she was telling me, even at college, she's only just gone off to college. She's 16, and she was made to feel embarrassed at her college simply because she didn't want to wear a pronoun badge. And she was ridiculed in the class in front of other people and made to feel bad. And I think that this isn't where we want to be. And so I think completely agree with her, right across the spectrum, whether it's infant age, right through to postgraduate education, freedom of speech should be granted.
Yeah.
Yes, gentleman there with the string ready. Yes, you sir. Yes, please.
Okay, I promise I'll be quiet, just so everyone can hear me. Thank you again for being here this time as well. It's always great to come to these events. How much time do you think it's going to take the BBC to start blaming Brexit for the current economic situation right now?
Well, I think it's probably in their DNA to do that. But leading on from what the gentleman over there said, really the economic performance of the EU has deteriorated very seriously since we left, which John referred to earlier. John, would you like to address this point from the audience directly?
Well, I don't think I want to comment on the editorial line of the BBC. We are well familiar with it. We would be very surprised to wake up one morning, most of us, and hear the BBC saying the government had done something well. Brexit was a great idea, but we all live in hope. But on the more general point you're making, yes, I think there are serious issues for our European friends across the Channel. Because they have persevered with a single currency without a proper country to back it. And they now have very important arguments going on over this very issue because they don't wish the interest rates in Italy to diverge very much from the interest rates in Germany. And in order to try and keep the Italian interest rates down, they wish to buy Italian bonds to keep the prices of those up and therefore the rates down, rather than buying German bonds anymore. And there is an argument over who takes the risk on that. And that is a very interesting argument. The Germans are saying, well, it can't be on ECB risk because we Germans stand behind the ECB. So why don't we let the Bank of Italy do that? And it would be at Italian risk. It would be very interesting to see how they resolve this problem. Incidentally, I'm sure you all realise that every pound of government sterling bonds that the Bank of England bought has been fully indemnified by you, the taxpayers, by the Treasury, by successive Chancellors, starting with Chancellor Darling, leading through to Chancellor Sunak, who signed off on the biggest amount of it, who I think are personally indemnified on behalf of the nation backing him, £450 billion worth.
I'd like to touch on the BBC in general, actually. I was one of the original people who sort of supported the defund the BBC campaign. And to me, if something is given taxpayers' money, whether it be universities through students' loans, or whether it's schools, whether it's our British Broadcasting Corporation, they should be impartial. Yes. And I think what we're seeing about this freedom of speech, I mean, if you actually go onto the portal where teachers access the BBC portal and young people do, where it's talking about the pronouns, it's saying there's 10 or so different genders. I think actually the BBC is part of the problem, personally. And I would like to see, if they can't be impartial, it does feel very Westminster, London-centric in their views. You're from up in Yorkshire like I am, and it's so far removed than what we feel elsewhere in the country. So I think I've got quite a lot of confidence in Michelle, because she did the brief before me on universities, and she was very passionate about freedom of speech. And I think if anybody's capable of taking the BBC on, I'd say it's Michelle Donald.
Could I just make I've been tracking the BBC and its impartiality issues for the best part of 35 years. And I can tell you this, I even actually gave advice to Norman Tebbit when he was chairman of the party on this question, but it's been a slow progress. But when, about 8 years ago, there was a new charter, I put forward the idea that the BBC should have inserted into its charter as one of its main purposes impartiality. And to my surprise, when the charter was published, it was in there. The only trouble is it hasn't been enforced, and that is the problem. So I would simply make a general caution about this. It's one thing to get the stuff into a charter, it's another thing to get it applied. But Michael Grade, who is now the chairman of Ofcom, is well apprised of this, and he has very sound views on this subject. So I would simply say watch this space, because it's got to be dealt with, and it applies to all the things that Andrew has referred to, and a vast number of other woke items, which are themselves causing a great deal of uncertainty in our present society, and a great deal of concern. And in terms of politics and the way in which they interview people, the manner in which they choose the people, and then set them up is all part of it. I am a supporter of the idea of the BBC, but please, BBC, will you reform yourselves, because otherwise you will be reformed by Parliament.
I'll take a couple of questions up there. First of all, not you, sir, the man behind you. Okay, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you for your comments, everyone. I'd like to just say that we've been talking about for years now, woke this, woke that. This has all happened in a Conservative government. I believe in a strong state of free economy. I appreciate your comments on the free economy, but when are we going to get a strong state back, away from Blair, away from the bloc, from the non-governmental organisation who've been sustaining the failures in the Home Office, particularly with immigration? So my question is, how do we take back control of our country? We've done it on a European level, and we've been restrained by people within our country.
We would like to address this particular. Tim, would you like to?
Okay, I wasn't quite sure exactly what the question was about, but I think one of the problems that all countries have in the modern world is the fact they have made commitments to international organisations, and then the bureaucrats in the international organisations get too big for their boots. And, well, this is just a problem for every country. Plainly, we've been ticked off in the last few weeks, by the last week or so by the IMF. I didn't like the Croatian administration, it's none of the IMF's business. So, I would say that we have to accept as a nation that we account for 3% of world GDP, and to prosper, we have to some extent to accept that we're going to be pushed around every now and again by other countries working through these bureaucracies. All I would say is that we've done a very good job in the last 2 years in getting out of the European Union, and that particular bureaucracy is no longer in charge.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, we're actually running up against the clock now, so I'll just take 2 more questions. First of all, the gentleman there who's waving his hand. Sorry, that one there. Yes, you, sir.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So, perhaps I'm John Mosley. I travelled all the way from Stafford today. And in our town, we've suddenly been given 400 illegal migrants. My friend over at Burton tells me that certain hotels in Burton-on-Trent are full of illegal immigrants. Does everybody know that it's costing us almost £8 million a day, and these people are illegal immigrants? We all voted for Brexit, we wanted control of our borders. Why can't this illegal migration be stopped?
Thank you very much indeed, sir. I'll take another question simultaneously, and then the panel can deal with these 2 seconds. Yes, you, sir.
Question for the Minister. I was pleased to hear your passion for freedom of speech. What are your views on the online safety bill? Why does the government feel like it has any business regulated speech which hasn't been deemed illegal, but they judge to be harmful simply because it's virtual? And for the wider panel, if I can, what's going wrong with the Bank of England? What can be done to ensure that monetary policy is more successful in the future?
Okay. Andrea, would you like to start?
Regarding the online safety bill, it is really a balance. As somebody who's employed myself, who's very good on phones already at 5, he even bought an iPhone on my Amazon account on a credit card. It's amazing that the next generation. So it is getting a balance right, and we do need to protect them. I get your point, I've heard it lots of times by the people, including constituents, but we need to get the balance right, definitely.
Policy of bond selling, bond buying to be replaced again by bond selling, because I don't think that is helping very much.
Thank you. Tim.
Okay, I'm not sure I make myself popular by what I'm about to say. in the leadership debate, there was this tension between Rishi Sunak and Rishi was criticised as kind of Gordon Brown. Please, Gordon Brown, I'm afraid he was a wretched Prime Minister, a successful Prime Minister, a successful Chancellor. Why? Because he actually adopted conservative policies. Let's just be clear. In the first part of the first of the Blair government, the first of 1997 to 2001, they repeated the conservative commitments on the budget deficit, government spending and so on, and then they got re-elected in 2000 with another landslide. They were just using Tory policies. So let's just be clear about this, that there's been a lot of continuity, because in fact, you know, that Labour government and the Conservative government from 2010 until, I'm afraid, quite recently, did agree about quite a lot. They agreed about strong public finances. The independence of the Bank of England assumed strong public finances. Once you get the kind of, I'm sorry, the mess that's going on at the moment, then I'm afraid you're going to get a lot of tension between the Bank of England and the Treasury.
Thank you, Tim, for that conclusion. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here and putting so many intelligent questions, putting our panel through their jumps on the racecourse. And could you please give them a real